Have you ever known exactly what needed to change and still found yourself doing nothing about it? Maybe you've known it's time to raise your prices, or maybe you wanted to launch a new offer. Maybe you were even considering applying for a leadership role, maybe speaking on stage, writing a book, or pursuing an opportunity that really felt important to you. You knew the next steps. You knew, you know exactly what needs to happen. And yet, somehow those weeks, they turn into months. And sometimes those months, well, they turn into years. And if you have ever experienced that, I want you to know you are not alone. And more importantly, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are lazy, unmotivated, or even lacking discipline. It may be something much deeper than that. It may be something called status quo bias. Now, status quo bias is the tendency to prefer things as they are, where how they are rather than embracing change, even when change may be the most beneficial thing for you. So, in simple terms, it is our brain's preference for familiar circumstances over those uncertain outcomes. And what is really fascinating is that this bias often operates completely beneath our awareness. Now, most people, they assume that they make decisions based on what is best, but often we make decisions based on what feels safest. And familiar almost always feels safer than the unknown. And here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that this tendency made perfect sense throughout much of human history. Because for our ancestors, caution was often a survival advantage because taking unnecessary risks could have had serious outcomes for them. Now, the brain has evolved to protect us from uncertainty because uncertainty, well, it often carried danger with it. Now, here's the challenge. The challenge is that our brain still reacts to uncertainty today, even when the situations that we are facing are very different. Because for most women, for us, we aren't making life or death decisions when we are considering a new business strategy, when we're considering raising our prices, when we are considering applying for a new leadership position, or even becoming more visible in our industry. Yet the brain often responds as though something dangerous is about to happen. And because of that, staying where we are begins to feel more comfortable, feels more comfortable than actually moving forward and making that change. Now, I see this pattern frequently among women entrepreneurs, but I also see it frequently among professionals. Someone knows, they know they need to make a change. They know that their current strategy that they have is not producing the results the way that they wanted it to. They also know that they are capable of so much more. But instead of moving forward, they continue refining, they continue researching, they continue preparing, and they also continue to wait. And it's not because they are incapable. I've said that many times. It is because familiar feels safer than uncertain. What makes status quo bias particularly difficult to recognize is that it often disguises itself as responsibility. Status quo bias sounds like, I just need a little more information. I need to wait for the right time. Or I want to be sure before I move forward. Or even I need to get everything in place first before I make that change. Now, sometimes those things are true. Preparation does matter. Thoughtful decision making, well, that matters too. But there comes a point where preparation actually becomes protection, where caution will stop supporting growth and starts protecting our comfort. And that line can be very difficult to see. One of the most powerful realizations that I have had is that staying the same is not actually a neutral choice. We often think of change as carrying risk, but staying where we are, well, you know what? It carries risk too. Every decision to avoid change is also a decision to preserve our current results. I want you to think about that for just a moment. So, when we are postponing a difficult conversation that we need to have, what we are doing is preserving the current relationship dynamics that we have. When we delay launching that new offer, what we're doing is preserving the current business results that we have. When we avoid becoming more visible in our industry and our business, what we're doing is preserving the current level of opportunities that we have. So that inaction, well, it feels passive, but it's actually a choice. And every choice, well, it creates an outcome. And I know I've experienced this myself. There have been seasons when I knew that a change was definitely necessary. And yet I hesitated. And I hesitated because that next step, well, it felt uncertain. I wanted more confidence. I wanted more clarity. I wanted assurance that the things that I was going to do were going to work out. But looking back, I can see that what I was really seeking wasn't information. I was absolutely seeking certainty. And certainty is something growth rarely will provide for you in advance. For me, anybody. What actually or eventually shifted my perspective was recognizing that confidence often doesn't come before the action. Confidence comes because of the action. We tend to think that successful people, well, that they move forward because they're confident. And they can be, but more often they become confident because they started to move forward. They took that next step. They had that conversation that needed to be had. They launched that new idea. They made the change that was necessary. And confidence developed all along the way. And this is one of the reasons that I talk about what I call the alignment gap. I've said this before in some of my videos, but I want to reconfirm it here. The alignment gap, it is that space between where we are and where we could be if our decisions were guided by clarity rather than those unconscious patterns. In status quo bias, well, it can create a significant gap in alignment because many women, we already know what needs to change. The issue is not awareness. The issue is actually overcoming that pull of familiarity long enough to actually take action. We stay connected to strategies that no longer serve us. We actually hold on to identities that we have completely outgrown. We continue operating in ways that once made sense, but now they no longer align with where we are trying to go. So, and every time we do this, that alignment gap, it will grow even wider. But here's the good news. The good news is that awareness, it will change everything. Once you recognize that status quo bias, can start to begin questioning whether you are staying where you are because it is right for you or because it's just familiar for you. And that is a very different question to ask yourself. And often it is the question that creates that movement for you. So if there is one thing that I want you to take away from this status quo bias video is this: familiar does not automatically mean you are aligned. Comfort does not automatically mean that you are right. And also, uncertainty does not automatically mean there is danger. Sometimes the growth you are seeking exists just beyond the edge of what feels comfortable for you. And it is not because you are guaranteed success. Of course not. It is because you are finally willing to make that move forward, because certainty will arrive when you do. Because the life, the business, the opportunity, or even the impact you are capable of creating, well, it is rarely going to exist on the other side of staying the same. It will exist on the other side of choosing to take the next step. I will see you next time.